So there was a new study that just came out and it has people panicking. This study was linking this artificial sweetener called erythritol with heart disease. So erythritol is found in a lot of different artificial sweeteners. Some common ones are stevia or truvia, and there's probably a bunch more, I just don't know them. So the main thing they found in this study was that if you have higher levels of erythritol in your blood, then you have a higher risk of having heart problems, specifically things like a heart attack or a stroke. Now, I'm not a huge fan of artificial sweeteners, but there are a few flaws with this study. The first problem is this study didn't really look at people's diet. Yeah, they found that erythritol levels in people's blood is associated with these heart problems, but they weren't really looking at people that were eating erythritol. And the study even mentioned that when you eat erythritol, most of it isn't metabolized so well, and most of it comes out in our urine. So you might be wondering, how can our erythritol levels be so high if we're not eating it? Well, erythritol is actually naturally produced in our body. So I totally understand if you were looking at it, logically you'd think that if you have higher levels of erythritol and it's associated with higher likelihood of heart events like a stroke or a heart attack, then you shouldn't be eating it, right? But unfortunately, that's not how it works in science. There's always a lot of other variables and stuff to look at, and just because one thing is associated with something else, it doesn't mean that one thing is causing that other thing, right? Correlation does not equal causation. For example, we don't know if the erythritol is actually causing these heart problems, or the heart problems are causing a higher level of erythritol. The erythritol could just be a byproduct in response to someone being unhealthy. And our erythritol levels in our body will vary depending on what's going on in our body. For example, if we're unhealthy, if we have pre-diabetes, or if we have actual diabetes, or if we have a lot of oxidative stress, or if we're eating glucose, our erythritol levels will fluctuate depending on all those different variables. So one thing that the study did was it had 4 different groups. The first group had very low levels of erythritol in their blood. Groups 2 to 3 had a little bit more erythritol in their blood, and group 4 had the highest level of erythritol in their blood. But only group 4 had a significantly higher risk of having heart problems compared to the other groups. But when you look at group 4, they were also generally a lot unhealthier compared to the other groups. For example, in group 4, they had 3 times more diabetes than group 1. And the researchers in this study actually acknowledged this. So they actually adjusted the numbers for diabetes, and the risk for heart problems in that 4th group was a lot lower. It was still significantly higher, but a lot lower. But there could be other things as well that were causing that higher erythritol that just weren't adjusted for. The best way to study this kind of data is to only look at one variable. So if you were able to isolate all other variables, like isolate out the diabetes, isolate out any oxidative stress or other problems, and only look at erythritol levels, and then compare that with heart problems, then this would be a lot more accurate in terms of one thing causing another. But unfortunately, that's really hard to do. And that's why anytime you get new science like this, then you have to take it with a grain of salt. So another thing that the study did was it put erythritol into mice and in vitro. So in vitro is basically into these test tubes. And they found that it causes some sort of blood clotting both in these mice and in these test tubes. And their thought process was, if it causes this blood clotting in mice, it might also cause blood clotting in humans. And the last thing that they did was they took these 8 human participants, they fed them erythritol, and they found that indeed their blood levels of erythritol actually went up. But the important thing to note here is just because it causes blood clotting in mice, it doesn't mean it'll cause blood clotting in humans. Our bodies are very different. And this happens all the time. There's also a lot of studies that show benefits when you put certain things in mice, but then when you put it in a human body, there's none of those benefits. And there's also a lot of studies that show benefits of taking erythritol. Like there's studies that show it gives you antioxidant properties, it's better for your endothelial function. So now it gets kind of confusing. I mean, do you look at the studies that show it causes benefits, or do you look at the studies that show it causes problems with their heart? So what should you take away from this study? Well, other than the fact that the media and everyone else panicked and blew up about it, it's really not that big of a deal, because there's studies like this that come out all the time. And at the end of the day, they were looking at erythritol levels in people's blood, not people who are actually eating erythritol. Those are 2 completely different things. And also, we don't know if the erythritol is what's causing these heart problems, or if it's just a marker as a byproduct of people who are generally unhealthy. If you already eat erythritol and you don't want to stop, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if you say you never want to eat erythritol again, then I wouldn't blame you. I mean, you don't really need erythritol to survive. So I think that overall this is a pretty weak study, but at some point in the future we might hear more about it, so let's wait and see. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked that video, and if you haven't already, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel below. I will see you in the next video.